All right, good afternoon and welcome to STL History Live. My name is Aaron Pelker. I am a Community Engagement Coordinator at the Missouri History Museum, and I want to thank you for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us. Before we get to today's presentation on Father of Waters, Early Explorers on the Mississippi River, I'd like to make a couple of brief remarks. The first is to thank two key contributors that help make programs like this possible: city and county residents and their contributions through the Zoo Museum Tax District, and our museum members. If you're already a member, thank you for your generosity. If you're not but would like to learn more about the membership process, please check the chat feature on Zoom for a URL link to our membership page on our website. Next, I want to take a moment to explain some of the features on Zoom. If you look at the toolbar on your Zoom app at the bottom, you'll see two features I'd like to highlight: closed captioning and the Q&A feature. You can enable closed captioning by clicking on the CC box on your toolbar. After our presentation, there will be about 10 minutes to ask questions of our presenters. You can use the Q&A dialog box on the Zoom app toolbar to submit those questions, but we do ask that you wait until the end of the lecture to submit your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but if we don't, we do have a way to get in touch with you and to answer your questions via email. Also, if you must leave the presentation early, we are recording today's lecture and it will eventually be available on the Missouri History Museum's YouTube page. So with that, I'd like to introduce our two featured speakers today. Emily Jaycox, librarian at the Missouri Historical Society's Library and Research Center, and Mike Venzo, military and firearm curator at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum. So thank you for finding yourself here. Enjoy and take it away, Emily and Mike.
Thank you. Let me get my slide up. Okay. I'm going to get my, okay, there we go. I'm so glad you're joining us for this presentation where I get to talk about one of my very favorite maps in all of the Missouri Historical Society's collections. This is a map that sheds light on an interesting incident that occurred in St. Louis and in North America in 1796. But in order to understand this, we need to back up in time a little bit. This is a map that was drawn up on the occasion of American independence from Britain. After many years of fighting, Britain agreed to recognize America as an independent country, and the European powers who had interests in North America needed another map that would help delineate the new international boundaries. So the new United States was recognized as reaching as far west as the Mississippi River, and Spain was controlling the land on the west of the Mississippi River, including an area which we would later come to know as the Louisiana Purchase Territory, but that had not happened yet. So Spanish Louisiana's capital was at New Orleans, and the capital of Upper Louisiana was St. Louis. The capital of the United States at that time was in Philadelphia. So we're going to start with our map story by introducing a French general named Georges-Henri Victor Collot, who was sent by the French government to be the governor of the island of Guadeloupe in the Caribbean in 1793. In 1794, British invaded Guadeloupe and Collot was dismissed, and he was party to a lawsuit at the time. So he wasn't able to go back home because he needed to be available for this court proceeding. So he went to Philadelphia and he checked in with his superior, who was Pierre Adet, who was the French foreign minister to the United States. Now, Philadelphia in the 1790s had a lot of French people there. Some of them were escaping from the French Revolution. Others had left the Caribbean after enslaved people had revolted. So Collot had a lot of French people to meet with. He asked if he could be of service to his country. The minister Adet said, yes, I have a job for you. I would like you to explore the rivers of the interior of the continent and write a report about their measurements. We need more accuracy than we have up to this point. And I'm also interested in knowing whether the people who live there are friendly to France. So Collot said, certainly, I would be happy to help. He worked with a lieutenant named Joseph Warine, and they went to Pittsburgh, and then they hired some men and a boat and started sailing down or rowing down, floating down the Ohio River and measuring as they went. It took them just under 2 months to reach the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi. On the way, they stopped at Fort Massac in now southern Illinois, and a young Zebulon Pike, who had not yet become famous for the Pikes Peak exploration, was in charge of that post and wasn't quite sure what to do with these French people. He was thinking maybe they were up to no good, but he seized their papers. No one at the fort could read French, so reluctantly he let them go. So they continued on. Their goal was to visit St. Louis and to explore the Missouri River as well. But they knew in order to visit St. Louis that they would be crossing an international boundary, and they weren't sure they would get permission to do the exploration they wanted. So his report's a little vague at this point, but it seems that they did explore the Missouri River at least as far as St. Charles, but they did it stealthily by night. When they finally did check in at St. Louis, they learned that before that happened, I want to show you a little bit of the kinds of things that he reported on. So he had some political information in his report. This is just a sample page from a much longer report that came out later. He talked about mineral resources in the area. He talked a lot about transportation, and which at that time was mainly river transportation. So he measured the differences between the river towns, and he talked about how there were no ferries or bridges, and that at the crossing points, that the boats were not large enough to carry horses or carriages, and that commonly the horses were made to swim across the stream. Another typical thing he wrote about was the flora and the agriculture in the areas that he toured. So while there, he learned that the British had sent some Native Americans with plans to try to assassinate him. The Americans had decided he was indeed up to no good and sent agents to arrest him. And Baron Carondelet in New Orleans had also sent an agent to arrest him. So Collot was in quite a quandary, but after considering the options, he decided to just continue his trip as originally planned and proceed down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. In fact, his lieutenant was wounded by an Indian attack and later died of his wounds. Collot was imprisoned by Baron Carondelet. His papers were seized. He had taken the precaution of making a duplicate secret journal that he hid in a special compartment, but some of his papers did not have duplicates, and he was very upset at not getting them back. Carondelet sent him back to Philadelphia. He promised to send him the papers later. He did send them after him, but unfortunately, the ship that those papers were on was boarded by pirates. And the bearer of the papers had been instructed not to let the papers fall into enemy hands, and so to prevent that, he threw them overboard. So Collot was back in Philadelphia trying to write a report. He had a lot of information, but some of it had to be reconstructed. Eventually, he went back to France, and he was working on his project with another Frenchman named Georges Dubois Saint-Lys, who was an accomplished military cartographer and also, I think, quite artistic. This is one of the most beautiful maps in our collection. Now, I have no evidence that Georges Dubois Saint-Lys ever visited St. Louis personally. He was in Philadelphia at the time Collot was, and they also knew each other in Paris. This manuscript, a watercolor map, became the basis of a published version of Collot's report. And this is what the map looked like when it was published. Much later, Another long, complicated story we could possibly talk about in the Q&A. I'm going to let you look at these side by side to compare them. So the purpose of this map, the purpose of this map from Collot's point of view was that after all his traveling, he had concluded that St. Louis was strategically a very important military post, potentially. He said whoever controlled St. Louis and Pittsburgh would have military control of the entire region between the Rocky Mountains and the Alleghenies. But in order for St. Louis to fulfill this role, it would need better fortifications. And this drawing was meant to show what those fortifications should look like. Nowadays, since St. Louis has no need of being a fortified city, we're more interested in what can this map tell us about colonial St. Louis and the people who might have lived there. When you look closely at this map, you might notice some things which, if you're familiar with colonial St. Louis, these would look odd to you. So there's a town square, and we do know there was a town square, a public square in St. Louis, but it wasn't in that spot. If you've ever been to New Orleans and you see how the buildings are touching each other and that they have central courtyards, and if you look at the way the buildings are depicted on this map, you can see that that is probably what the artist had in mind. And this is one of the reasons I don't believe he was ever in St. Louis. I think this was for him just sort of an artistic filler, yada, yada, yada. This is what a town looks like. The towns that he was familiar with would have looked like that. By the time the map was printed and engraved for publication, it looks like some of that had been straightened out. So historians believe that St. Louis looked much more like this map on the bottom, with smaller cottages with land between them, similar to what you would see if you visit historic St. Genevieve. Houses with side yards and backyards and space in between. So the engraver of this map got some things right, but if you also notice, he got something else wrong. He's got the Mississippi River flowing backwards. So this is just one of many maps of the Mississippi, and now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Mike to tell you about some more.
Thanks so much, Emily. It's such a fascinating story of Collot's journey, and we're both delighted to be able to present this afternoon on this topic of the folks that were early explorers along the Mississippi. Unfortunately, because of the virus outbreak, you're not all able to come and visit the exhibit, Mighty Mississippi. And this hopefully gives you a little bit of insight into some of the stories that are told in that exhibit and a little more background. And we encourage you all, when you're able to get back, the museum's back open, to come and visit and see that wonderful exhibit. So I'm going to share with you kind of an overview of some of these early explorers along the Mississippi River. And again, trying to do this in 10 minutes will certainly not do justice to all the wonderful stories that we can go into deeper with so many of these. But I'll try and give you some of the highlights and highlight a lot of the great maps that we have in our collection along the way. And one of the first things I want to point out is that while Hernando de Soto, who you see depicted here on the right on horseback, is credited as the first European to quote, discover or visit the Mississippi River in 1541, there was a whole culture, a civilization and community all up and down the Mississippi River. Most closely recognized here across the river from us at Cahokia. You see this great painting by Bill Eisminger that shows sort of at the peak, 1200, was one of the largest cities on the continent at the time. And so there was the river, and folks that were here was not an empty, vast open land. It was communities, civilizations, and cultures all up and down. And the folks that came later, white explorers primarily, came through and documented and created a lot of these maps. So the first map that exists, the earliest map, I should say, that really exists that we have today, is from the Marquette and Joliet expedition. And Jacques Marquette was a Jesuit, and he partnered up with Louis Joliet, who was a French-Canadian explorer. And they had heard all these stories about the Mississippi River Valley and what was there. And so they set out to explore it. And they actually came down from the Green Bay area over here in the lower right corner of the museum You see that dotted path, and then intersected the Mississippi River up here, and then flowed down the Mississippi River past the Illinois here, the Missouri. This is sort of how St. Louis is depicted with these two little hills here. And farther down, the Ohio. You'll notice here it's listed as River Mississippi, which is kind of a fun little pronunciation of the name. And they continue down here, and this is the Arkansas or the Arkansas River. And this is really the extent of their travels. They started encountering a lot of Spanish artifacts and communications and things, and feared that they would run into other folks that were there, and they turned around and went back up the river. So they kind of project where the Mississippi meets the Gulf of Mexico. And this is in 1673. And on their return visit, they came back through here, again, passing what we now know as St. Louis, and then took the Illinois River back. They did a little portage here. And so they were the first white folks to spend the night in Chicago, essentially. That's essentially what Chicago is founded here on the shores of Lake Michigan as they returned. The earliest map that shows St. Louis that we're aware of is actually at the National Library in Spain, and it's from 1767. And I just love this map. There's so many great details in it. I'm going to show you just a couple. Here you can see a kind of a zoomed in portion with the village of Payne Court, which is one of the earliest names for the village of St. Louis. And you see it here. So this predates the Callot view that Emily was showing you, but looks like he got the arrow going the right direction on the Mississippi here with the islands. And then directly across the river, you'll see over here is Cahokia of a similar or even larger size. And just going a little bit farther upriver on the Mississippi, this is the confluence. So the Mississippi River is going this way to the right. Dropping down from the top of the map is the Missouri River coming in. So this is the confluence. And you'll notice there are two forts here. This was known as Fort Don Carlos, actually. It says St. Charles, but it was known as Don Carlos. And there was a cannon that was in this fort. And eventually, as this area was always prone to flooding, they removed that cannon and brought it down to downtown St. Louis, and was part of the battle of Fort San Carlos, where they had the fort there at 4th and Walnut in 1780 as part of the American Revolution. The other thing I'll point out right here, you'll see this little rivulet, R.A. Dubois, which is French for wood, Dubois or tree. So the River Dubois or Wood River, you can see, is directly opposite the confluence. This is one of my favorite maps of all time by Aaron Arrowsmith, made in 1802, and he's showing the whole continent of North America. And what I really love about this, I'll show you as I zoom in a little bit more, is to see this difference in sort of what was known, the knowledge at the time of the continental geography. And the prevailing theory was this idea of reciprocal geography. So you'd see the Adirondack and Appalachian Mountains here along the eastern portion of the United States. And then they believed there was this sort of single reciprocal band of mountains in the west. And all of this sort of cross-hatching and information over here represents the river systems and communities and cities that were known. And you see fewer and fewer of those as you go this way. The green highlighted colored band here highlights the Mississippi River Valley. St. Louis is right here. This is the Missouri River. And so from here up in North Dakota, the Mandan villages, all the way to this little point, which is Mount Hood and the Columbia River, this looks like this big, vast, empty territory. But we know, of course, it wasn't. It was, again, filled with civilization, filled with community, filled with people, filled with a huge geography that was soon to be discovered. And among those that utilized the Arrowsmith map and were some of those first to go out and discover that territory was the Corps of Discovery, or the Lewis and Clark expedition. And where they first encountered the Mississippi was on November 25th of 1803, coming just like Callot did, as Emily described, down the Ohio River, and they reached an area known as Grand Tower or Tower Rock. And this was the first time that Clark wrote the words Mississippi River in his cartographic notes, and created this great map that we have in the MHS collection. And so he's depicting here in his typical style, again, the arrows showing the flow of the river, showing the flow going to the south. And this is Grand Tower or Tower Rock, and this little boat here indicates where they camped for the evening. And so the following day, the 26th and 27th, Meriwether Lewis and others climbed to the top of Tower Rock that you see here in this great Carl Bodmer print from a few years later, and measured its height at 92 feet. And he started surmising that at some point this was probably connected to the adjacent hillsides there. And so eventually the expedition continues north, upriver, reaching St. Louis and Cahokia, and then they get a little farther and they actually camp at Wood River on the Illinois side of the Mississippi. And they're there from December 12th, 1803, all the way till May 14th, 1804, when they finally set out. And so there's a number of days and visits back and forth up and down the Mississippi from Wood River to St. Louis that primarily Lewis and then sometimes Clark as well are traversing the Mississippi. And then they come back from their journey in September of 1806, again, a little section of the Mississippi River down to St. Louis. So Emily gave a great introduction to the Colosse story, and I just love his map so much. I can't resist showing a few more of them. This is the series of maps that he created. On the left, you'll see the large view. This is basically from the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans. And then here's a portion of that with all this great detail, the sort of landscape around the river. And here you can really see it with this view at the confluence. So St. Louis being right here, there's the Merrimack River as well. And then his view, a little farther up, this may look familiar to that view from the Dufaucet map. And what you see here, again, in the confluence of the Missouri here, the Mississippi, and this is the River Du Bois, and those same little islands. So keep these islands in mind as we click through a few more slides. And here's his view of the village of St. Louis, kind of a fun spelling there. So soon after that map is drawn, and Colosse does his much earlier, and then they're actually published later in the 1830s. And soon after that, a young Lieutenant, Robert E. Lee, who graduated from West Point a couple years earlier, 1835, is assigned to come to St. Louis to help plot the harbor at St. Louis. And so the problem here was the Mississippi River flowing this way was actually spending more of its energy flowing on this side of what was then known as Bloody Island. And so this section here, the harbor in front of the city of St. Louis, was starting to fill in with sand. And this was problematic because it would prevent the steamboats and other vessels from anchoring here because of this huge sandbar. And so what Lee and his colleague Montgomery Meigs did is they measured the depth in great detail of the Mississippi River, which you see all these little marks here, and came up with a proposal to put a dike here and one across here. And what that would do is that would force the channel of the river along here, clearing out all that sand and mud, and then eventually that would pile up here and fill this in. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually, Bloody Island connects to what we now know as East St. Louis as a result of this plan developed by Robert E. Lee in 1837. And then because of that, a few years later, this is that result. You can see all those steamboats were on this side, the Missouri side of the river. Otherwise, they would have ended up over on the East St. Louis side a few years later. And I just love this great view of the busy activity of the city. And you see the old courthouse here and just sort of as far as the eye can see. So about that same time, there's a gentleman, a French gentleman explorer and a scientist who comes to America and gets to know the scientific community in DC and starts to go out and explore the river system. And he's kind of a gifted cartographer. And his name is Joseph Nicollet. And so starting in 1836, he starts doing explorations of the Mississippi and up through the Missouri River Valley. And he does a series, 3 expeditions. The second one in 1838, by that time he's appointed the head of the newly created Corps of Topographical Engineers, which is part of the US Army. And then he has with him a gentleman named John Charles Fremont, who is a young engineer as well, and joins his expedition in both 1838 and 1839. And they end up producing a really wonderful report and this great map that's known as a hydrographical basin of the upper Mississippi River. And the key thing that he does is that Nicollet discovers there were some errors in some maps that Zebulon Pike created about the source of the Mississippi. That gets corrected. And so this is the Mississippi River here. This is the Missouri River going here. And so they really are documenting this area between the 2 rivers. And just to show you that level of detail is just fabulous with all these lines of all of the little creeks and rivulets that feed into these communities along the way. Again, here's the St. Louis area. You see Jefferson Barracks and Bell Fountain. And one of my favorite little anecdotes on that huge map that goes from basically St. Louis to Canada and across, like, I don't know, 6-8 states, you see Creve Coeur Lake makes it on that map, which I love because that's where we normally go to walk, not too far from where I'm at right now. But I love that Creve Coeur Lake is on this huge map from 1843. Another of the great maps we have in our collection are these ribbon maps that show the river in kind of an interesting way, and they would be printed on large sheets of paper, trimmed down to these ribbons, glued together, and put on these rollers that you see. And you could actually unfurl it almost like a blind, pull it out, see where you were going down the river. And here you see a detail of the St. Louis area. There's some of those islands we were talking about. Again, the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi. And what I like to point out here is you'll see all these heavy lines with the RR behind it. Many of you will recognize that's probably representative of railroad lines, and that's exactly right. And you'll notice that there's no bridge crossing over the Mississippi. These railroad lines end at the river's edge. And eventually, that problem is resolved by 1874 with the creation of the Eads Bridge. And I just absolutely love this view that depicts the activity of St. Louis here on this side. Here's the former Bloody Island right here, and then all of the steamboats and industry that you see off into the far horizon. And then bringing up to more contemporary times, the same area, looking at it, the U.S. Geological Survey gets created, and they're producing some pretty highly detailed quadrangle maps in 1933 that you see on the left of how the river system was being developed and tracked, and you see these bridges. By 54, they've created the Chain of Rocks Canal through here to help navigate low spot in the falls upriver. And you see a few more bridges. And by 2008, you see even more bridges, the evolution of Gabourey Island here, including the Stan Musial Bridge now across there as well. And then just to show you that we started out with folks drawing pencil and paper from actually being in canoes and boats down on the river. By the 1990s, we're able to utilize satellites up in outer space to give us a new map of the same area, the Mississippi and Missouri confluence. So this is what the river looked like early in 1993. And then by the time of the Great Flood, you start to see the same view with the tremendous amount of water. And what I really like about this too is the darker spots that show the water are highlighting those valleys that you saw on those glow maps and the map that Emily was sharing as well, how great and wide those valleys are that these rivers are flowing in between. So with that, I hope I gave you a little bit of a tease of the early explorers up to today and how we're looking at the river. And I think Emily and I are available to take any questions that you may have. Let's see here. I'm going to click the Q&A button there. Emily, if you can do the same.
Right.
You want to take that first one there?
I'll take the first one. Right. So we love these maps. Many of the maps we showed you, copies are available at the Missouri Historical Society Library and Research Center. Some of those are also digitized and on our website. Some of them are, we've used other copies, like Mike used some other copies in his presentation from other libraries that might have gotten to the digitization project a little ahead of us. Some maps are on display in reproduction in the Mighty Mississippi exhibit, but the bulk of our collection would be either on our website or the Library and Research Center. And let me work on getting a link. I'll send it out later. I'll get a link to a way to just explore maps in our online collection search. And then the other two ones look like good Mike questions to me.
All right. One of them is, where did the name Bloody Island come from? And there's a number of stories about that. Typically, the island that was, as you can see in that early map, just off the shores of downtown St. Louis, became the venue for a lot of duels. At the time, that's how a lot of, shall we say, gentlemen were settling their disputes. And so they would arrange to meet on what became known as Bloody Island to settle their disagreements through dueling. And like I said, eventually the island itself, through the reworking of the river, became part of the East St. Louis, and where the East Bridge above it is now. Now I think the Casino Queen is over in that area. Another question about what happened to Tower Rock, and does it still exist? Another one asked. It does, in fact, still exist. It's several, I can't remember, maybe about a 2-hour drive or so, or hour-and-a-half drive maybe, south of St. Louis. There's some points where you can get somewhat close to it. It's certainly best seen on the Mississippi River itself, but I believe there are some vantage points that you can drive to be able to see it. And I think in times when there's been low water, some people are actually able to walk out to the base of it, but most of the time it still is an island that's there. And it's evolved a little bit, as you can imagine, with the constant flow of the Mississippi River all around it. Let's see, we have a question about it. How many folks tuned in today? We're on get the little back end of this. It looks like we've got over 60 some people that are tuned in right now. And it's great. It's kind of a neat use of technology. We all are anxious to get back to work to help serve all of our visitors and see all of our colleagues, of course, and do the work that we love doing. But we've been able to do a lot of it from home, actually, and the great resources that we put in, as Emily mentioned, in digitizing these collections and making things available. It also makes it easier for all of you to do as well. Let's see.
Goodness, I see a question about the methods that the mappers used. So there's different kinds of maps, but most of the maps that we've featured involve people who had training using various tools at the time, survey materials, compasses, various measuring devices. There was a lot of development in mapping, in how maps were made in the centuries leading up to this. But by the time that these map makers were going, they had a pretty good understanding, I think, of latitude and longitude and some other things. In the Missouri History Museum, we do have a nice little, one of our exhibit cases in the Seeking St. Louis Currents exhibit has examples of some of the tools that were used by map makers and surveyors in the colonial era. I hope that's at least a start on the answer.
Yeah, and it's great to look at the study of, I mean, when you study the maps themselves and see the different techniques in which they were depicting things, such as topography or elevation. It's quite fascinating to see how that was even used early on. That great manuscript map that you showed with the Callot has all that wonderful detail, and then how it got simplified again for the printing. So sometimes the mechanisms of distribution and the technology that was able to share the information would change the methods that they were using to create the maps.
I see a question about the extent of the fire. There's a link, we do have that one online. There's a really good one, and I can put that in the follow-up notes.
Yeah, you're referring to that great print that shows the fire, and then down below there's sort of a map of downtown that shows the areas that were burned in the 1849 fire.
And when you talk about St. Louis, changing to St. Louis, well, so the story of getting the Callot maps printed, there's two answers I'll have for that. One is that he was a Frenchman writing in French. He got his maps translated into English, but we don't know anything about the translator, and they were working from far away, and I don't know why they made that mistake. It looks like a big mistake to us. Since St. Louis was named after a French king and saint, it should have always been Louis. But the other question the other answer I have to that is, in that time period, even people who were quite well educated were often not the greatest spellers. And Mike is smiling. He's read Lewis and Clark journals very closely. They were very well educated men, but spelling was not given the priority I think that it was later today. A lot of people spelled phonetically, just they wrote down what they heard, and that was considered more acceptable back in that day.
There's another question here about on the Marquette map. St. Louis and Cahokia are shown as mounds, presumably remnants of the Cahokia culture. There were also a couple of similar mounds upriver on the Mississippi. Do you know what these were? And I could possibly go back if we wanted to show that map. Let me see if I can do that real quick. Do this. bring that back. And so the culture of the, sorry. There we go. So we're referring to here these mounds here very well could be representation of sort of that mound culture that still we see some remnants of that at Cahokia, but also showing the topography, the larger topography that they were encountering as they were going through the Mississippi River Valley. And so you can see in this small map what they're depicting is a huge amount of country and territory from the Gulf of Mexico up to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Chicago at Lake Michigan. And so things like the scale and the proportions of things often get thrown out as they're trying to do that. And this is a map, again, as Emily was describing, that's drawn by a cartographer for a publication that comes after these folks were doing their maps in the field. And so there's all kinds of errors and misconceptions and things that can get put into a lot of the maps. But I think in general, they're probably more representing the larger topography of the valley here rather than specifically the mounds, although there were mounds all up and down the Mississippi River with large groupings at Cahokia as well. Let me see if I can.
I'm looking at your question about the outrageously wrong maps of St. Louis. That's an interesting question. Nothing is jumping to mind as far as deliberately wrong, but there are a lot of maps in our collection that were proposals. Just as Callot's map was a proposal, I think St. Louis should be fortified in this manner, which didn't happen. But there are other maps that show transit routes that were never implemented. There was, when people were trying to figure out, thinking that the St. Louis riverfront needed fixing in the 20th century and thinking about a different way to lay it out, there was ideas of turning the whole river, like where our arch is now, into a airport landing strip. So there can be examples of maps being used as proposals for things that somebody was advocating for but never occurred. That would be possibly another Zoom talk or article when we can get back to our map collection and explore a little bit more deeply.
So real quick, I was going to call up another map, but I'll answer two other quick questions. Did the Cahokia tribe also populate the western or the St. Louis side of the Mississippi? And the quick answer to that would be yes. In this map here that's on the screen, you can actually see some of the mounds just to the kind of north of the grid of St. Louis here. And those are believed to be from that same Mississippian culture that was over at Cahokia on both sides of the river. And another person asked about, is the eastern tower of the Eads Bridge anchored in what was Bloody Island? And that's correct. That whole area on the eastern eastern side of the Eads Bridge over there would be what used to be Bloody Island. So I called up this map, and maybe there's this one or that other view that follows this that's kind of fun. They asked, using an early map of your choice, can you explain the main buildings, commerce on the riverfront, and layout of early St. Louis? And so in this view, you can kind of see that this is 1837. You can see that sort of grid structure that's present in all the maps that are earlier. But I think maybe the image, it's not truly a map, it might give you the better feel of what the riverfront sort of look like, and the commerce might be this shot. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that, or Emily, do you want to jump in?
I was looking at your screen and I kind of lost my spot in the all the tech here. I would only add that the Callot map that I focused on, the footprint of the village of St. Louis pretty much matches, if you think about the grass under the arch, that's the part of town we're talking at. And so St. Louis in its earliest times as a trading post was occupying that footprint, and then it spread along the riverfront north and south as well as out west. And then like the village of Carondelet at one time was a separate town. Now it's the southernmost neighborhood in St. Louis City, but at one point they were completely separate towns. They were, connected. People could go back and forth, but they were separate districts and jurisdictions, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is all our time. If we did not get to your question, we will reach out to you after we finish up here because we do have your email contact. So I apologize if we didn't get to it today, but we will make sure that we reach out to you. But I do want to thank everyone again for joining us for today's STL History Live. Thanks to Mike and Emily for a fascinating look at early explorers on the Mississippi River. We do have a short survey that will appear in your web browser once you close Zoom. So please fill that out if you have time because we do value and use your feedback to improve these presentations. Thanks again. I do hope you'll join us next time for STL History Live on Tuesday, April 28th at 11 a.m. for Finding Your St. Louis Ancestors Online. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.